It's Johnny Cash Friday. Earlier today, I got to sit down and talk with an attorney by the name of Mr. John Tull. Go ahead and cue this up, Josh. Here it is from earlier today. You got to hear this interview about freedom of information. Take a listen. Ladies and gentlemen, earlier in the week, we decided to cover some of the potential changes to our Freedom of Information Act laws. It's made a few publications, and it's been a little controversial on the program this week, no doubt about it. In one of those publications over at the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette earlier in the week, the headline was Arkansas Colleges Aiding in Less Open FOIA Bid. And there was a gentleman who was quoted in this story, and he is Mr. John Tull. He's a Little Rock attorney, and he's also the general counsel for the Press Association. And he joins us now. John, welcome to the Paul Herald program.
Thanks, Paul.
Tell us real quick, the general counsel for the Press Association, what's that all about?
I have dealt with First Amendment in media issues for most of my 30-plus year practice, and I've had the honor for a substantial period of time of being general counsel for the Arkansas Press Association. As general counsel, I advise, provide legal work for the Press Association, and my firm and I also man a Freedom of Information hotline for members of the Press Association who deal with the Act on a day-to-day basis as they attempt to obtain public records for use in their publications. Okay, so you know a thing or two. That'd be an understatement. You know a thing or two about the Freedom of Information Act. I can always learn, but I do deal with it on a regular basis. So I've been covering the Arkansas General Assembly, on all of these issues, for the last 9 weeks, and we do so extensively even when they're not in session. But a lot of people say that Arkansas has one of the best FOIA laws in the country. Do you agree with that? I do absolutely agree with it. It was modeled and is similar to one that was codified in Wisconsin, and I think the Wisconsin and the Arkansas legislature were seen sort of as leaders for the freedom of information, and I believe Arkansas is among the strongest in the nation currently, and one of the reasons is we have been successful in trying to create a increase in unnecessary exemptions over the years. And, it's all about transparency, and that's, I'm a huge proponent of the public trying, getting as much information as we can whenever we need it from the government because, it's corruption tends to find a home in government, and so that's why this law is so important. And so what do you know about Senate Bill 373? It's by Senator Bart Hester. I'm looking at an amendment right now that was filed by State Representative Bob Ballinger. So talk to us a little bit about what you think this bill will do. Give me the Senate bill number again. It's SB 373. To exempt attorney-client communications and attorney work product from the Freedom of Information Act of 1967. Okay, I'm with you, Paul. What this bill attempts to do is just add a specific exemption for attorney-client privilege and attorney work product that does not exist currently. Philosophically, my issue with that is that attorneys who work for public entities are different. We're not paid by private clients. We're paid by the public. We are being paid by the public to do our work. And so from a freedom of information perspective, I believe the press and the public have a right to know what that attorney is doing for the particular public entity that he's working with. Now, the real issue that comes along and the complaints that I've heard from lawyers and from others is that this hampers the attorney representing the public agency because under civil procedure rules in the state of Arkansas, product information that would be classified as attorney-client privilege or as work product would not be discoverable by the other side. I understand the argument, but from knowing people who regularly represent agencies, I believe they successfully walk that path and understand that everything is going to be transparent, and I don't think that that has actually harmed them. I've also, what I was quoted in the newspaper recently as saying was that the Freedom of Information Act, as it now sits, provides for an exemption for an order from a court. And I have regularly advised people who are in litigation and who become tired or become concerned that their opponent can avoid the rules of civil procedure and avoid the timing required by the rules of a particular court by using the Freedom of Information Act. And so what I've always counseled people is to get an order from a particular court.
Yes.
That with that piece of litigation, it should comply with the specific court rules at play, and that freedom of information may not be used as an end run around the rules of civil procedure and the discovery rules that a particular court might have applied to a particular act.
And I've made that point. I've made that point earlier in the week. That a judge could order, this stuff is stuff you don't have to turn over. It's interesting because you yourself are an attorney, and sounds like you're against this. You want the FOIA law left alone. From just a general standpoint, and I'm not an attorney, sir, but just from a general standpoint, someone who follows the workings of government. In many cases, it seems like the government has a lot of advantages, and so even if the argument is true that somehow a government attorney is disadvantaged, well, hey, score one for the taxpayers. That's the way I feel about it.
Well, I think we have a very able bar in the state of Arkansas, very capable lawyers, and I am confident that any attorney who's hired by a public entity is able to thread his way to avoid anything that really acts as a burden against his case. And I believe that the transparency is more important in that case than the need to change the law. I do not believe there's a pressing need for that change.
We're talking with John Tull. He's a Little Rock attorney. He's the general counsel for the Press Association. Very familiar, as you can tell, with Freedom of Information Act requests. So we're talking about this Arkansas law, Senate Bill 373. And here's some of the amendment that bothers me, John. If I read here in Section 2, it says, a record related to pending or threatened litigation that, if kept by a private attorney for a non-governmental entity, would be privileged from disclosure as an attorney-client communication or attorney work product record under the Arkansas Rules of Civil Procedure, Arkansas Rules of Evidence, or Arkansas Rules of Professional Conduct, as used in this subdivision. Threatened litigation means awareness by a governmental entity through an actual written or verbal communication from a potential claimant or the claimant's representative that the claimant will likely seek legal relief in a court, tribunal, or administrative agency against the governmental entity or its officials. And written or verbal communication means an indication by a person or entity, including an action by an administrative agency. So essentially what that means to me is, if they think, or somebody says, hey, I'm going to sue you, either verbal communication or written communication, they can withhold the information. Is that the way you see it?
That's the way I see it, and I see it even as broader in that, for instance, Paul, somebody could be known as a litigious person and may make some threat of, you're going to regret this. And is that threatened litigation? I think when you add terms that allow the decision maker, the custodian of the records, to make some sort of a subjective opinion as to whether he or she believes the litigation is pending, I think you open things up for possibly being claimed exempt that should not be actually claimed as exempt. And my experience first, Paul, is that 99% of the agencies and public entities that deal with the freedom of information do a great job. There's always some bad apples. And what I find and what I fear is I have found cases where people attempt to hide a document for whatever reason. They think they don't want it out in the public eye. They think it's going to hurt someone's reputation, or for whatever reason. And I've seen that document given to third parties, and I've seen other attempts to try and shield information that an entity may not want to be public actually made public. So if this bill passes, what I also believe will happen is that every time there's a situation, say somebody at the school, somebody's having a problem with a teacher, there's been a complaint about treatment of a child by a teacher, then an attorney is going to be drawn into that situation at the very first, and the claim is going to be made that every part of that investigation is going to be subject to that exemption and is going to be exempt until a threatened litigation is over with. And I know all that you, like me, who have children, you want to know what's going on in your schools, you want to know what's going on in your communities, and the thought that something may be shielded for years under an exemption like that is concerning, and I think contrary to this idea of the Sunshine Act of open records for the public to see what its government is doing.
Well, to play devil's advocate here, they do say that so after the litigation is over, it says 90 days upon the close of litigation or any associated appeal, then they'll be subject to the Freedom of Information Act, or 1 year after the date of the threat of litigation, if no litigation is indicated. The question says, okay, so if they get this verbal communication, are they gonna document when the verbal threat was made so we know that it's been a year? I mean, we don't know what we don't know, number one. And number two, and John, I know that you'll agree with this, we give them 3 days to comply with FOIA because time is of the essence with this stuff, because of what you said, hide this document, shred this document. But, I mean, you can get an attorney to essentially look at anything and be like, oh, let me take a look at that. Now that's attorney-client privilege. I just don't understand. There's nobody clamoring. The average Arkansan is not clamoring for this adjustment in the Freedom of Information Act. This just screams like a special focused interest, and it's going to hurt transparency, I think. What do you think, John?
Well, I certainly believe that it hurts transparency, and I don't know exactly what the contingency is, or I don't know what the group is that is pushing for this. I know some of my fellow lawyers are divided about this. I've seen blog reports where some people are in favor of an exemption and some people are not. Usually it's from people who don't regularly deal with the Freedom of Information Act representing a public entity, because I think those people, by and large, again, we have a great group of lawyers in the state of Arkansas, and I think it is something that is more easy to work with than some people might think on first blush. And I just don't think that there's a problem that I'm aware of that some public entity's lawsuit has been hampered as a result of the Freedom of Information Act.
Yeah, well, I don't see a problem either, but apparently Senator Bart Hester, along with this amendment by State Representative Ballinger, they do think that there is some problem that needs to be addressed here. But I just, for the life of me, somebody who's a member of the press myself, John, I mean, I want to be able to get this information under the current law of 1967, and I don't want anything to happen with it because, again, it's one of the best FOIA laws in the country. Why are we doing this?
I agree, and you and your lead-in, Paul, referenced a bill specifically targeted to universities, and I'm speaking of Senate Bill 261, which is specifically aimed at institutions of higher learning, and that bill would exempt records relating to pending or reasonably anticipated litigation involving a state-supported institution of higher education, its officers or its employees are confidential and not subject to information until that litigation would be finished. And again, I don't see the need for that to single out universities as having some special exemption under the Freedom of Information Act over its litigation. Again, I'm not aware of any piece of litigation that a institution of higher learning has somehow been hampered, or that the university itself has been harmed in the litigation as a result of having to comply with the law.
Yeah, I don't know. And that's news to me. This Senate Bill 262, that was also by Senator Hester and Representative Davis. And from what I can tell, there's no vote on that yet. It was, filed back on the, I guess, the 31st of January. But the bill that does have some activity is Senate Bill 373, which is broader, an act to exempt attorney-client communications and attorney work product from the Freedom of Information Act. I mean, it doesn't mention colleges. It's just like it's more any government entity.
It is broader, Paul, and all of these, and that's part of, I think, the heightened concern that members of the media have, is all of these bills were filed in a very short period and is seen by people dealing with the Freedom of Information Act and with the media as an attack on the act. And some have more movement than others, and you're right, the bill that currently has traction is the one offering the broad exemption, but there was for some reason, there were more bills providing new exemptions to the act than at any time that I can remember during my 30-plus years of doing this.
Yeah.
And I don't know the reason behind it.
Well, it looks like it got 30 yes votes in the Senate. I mean, so it's on to the House, and I don't see a vote yet on it in the House or a House committee yet. So, I mean, we'll certainly keep an eye on this, and I'd love to have you back on to talk about this if we have new developments. Little Rock attorney John Tull, I appreciate it, sir. Thank you so much for coming on.